Hello.
Tura, you need to unmute.
All right, let's go. So welcome all to the HUR Australia webinar to discuss the best ways we can stay healthy during the COVID-19 time and associated isolation. We're quite thrilled. There actually are more than 450 people from all around the world who've joined us. So all I can say is good afternoon, Australia, New Zealand and Singapore. Good morning, Finland, and good day to all the other time zones that we might have visited. In the spirit of reconciliation, HUR Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. My name is Tori Karahara-Husman. I'm from HUR Australia. I will be your MC today. Now, the idea for this webinar actually came when the isolation and the COVID was taken all over the world, and we really thought, how can we help people to stay healthy? How can we, people have limited chances to exercise and we're all stuck at home, but there's still so many things what we could be doing. So we did reach out to our friends and ask them if they could join us in the webinar to talk about their expertise, their experiences, and really give their best advice on how we can try to stay healthy during these tough times. And we're very lucky that all these people actually joined us. So today we have 4 fantastic speakers who can share their knowledge and expertise. First, we will have Dr. Tim Henwood to talk about the muscle health. Tim is today talks from Adelaide in South Australia, and we'll talk about the muscle health and sarcopenia and how to stay healthy. Followed by Tim, we have Ngaire Hobbins, who is zooming in from Hobart in Tasmania. And Ngaire is a nutritionist talking really about the protein intake and all the health we can do. Ngaire is followed by Dr. Sharon Hetherington, who is from the My Active Attitude and is zooming in from Brisbane in Queensland to talk about the home exercises. And our final speaker in our webinar is Bob Barnard, who is from the Centre for Physical Activity in Ageing in South Australia Health and is zooming in from Adelaide. Really, Bob's topic really is health in isolation, so Bob is going to be putting in all the information we received to give best advice. During this webinar, all your microphones will be on mute, and your videos also will be disabled, just to make sure the webinar runs smoothly, and also our internet is not going to fail with this number of people. During the webinar, all the speakers will have 15 minutes for their presentations. And during the presentations, we would like you, the audience, to propose some questions for us. So in your screen, there's a little icon with Q&A, and this is the place where you can answer your questions. So type them in. Now, 5 minutes for questions and 450 attendees, maybe even more at the moment. So we won't have the chance to ask or answer all the questions. There's a little thumbs up button. So if you click on the thumbs up button, you're voting for a question if it's similar to what you would like to have answered. And that way your question will then go up in the list, and we will make sure that we'll ask that question from the presenter. All the other questions we'll record them, we store them, and we will try to answer them after the webinar. So we'll post them on our website. Also, I will have a little squeaky toy here. Here's a little giraffe, which makes a sound like this. This is not for the audience. This is for the speakers in case they talk too much. So 1 squeak means they have 5 minutes left, and 2 squeaks, time is up. We have 1 minute left. So that's the main thing that we're going to be doing today. So I really hope that you will enjoy your time with us, and thank you again so much for joining us. Now, let's move on to our first presenter who's already there. So Dr. Tim Henwood is a special population exercise physiologist with a wide research publication record on targeted exercise programs for adults 65 years and over. He currently holds a role as the Group Manager for Community Wellness and Lifestyle with Southern Cross Care in South Australia, Victoria and Northern Territory, and with a specific interest in older adults with complex healthcare needs. Tim is a strong advocate for targeting exercise and therapy with correct exercise prescription. Even the oldest and most unhealthy adults can be re-abled back to better health and well-being. Tim has a very large research portfolio on sarcopenia, which is one of the issues today, and also has really lovely papers on proper exercise prescription. So he really is a great guy to start day to day. So I want to welcome Tim. The stage is yours for the next 15 minutes. Enjoy Tim's presentation.
Thank you, Turi, and thank you all for joining us today. So if any of you guys have heard me speak before, I'm going to end up talking a lot about resistance training and weight-bearing exercise. If you think you've heard enough, you can have the next 15 minutes off. Otherwise, let's get into it. So, slide. So most of you guys who've worked with older adults will realise that as we increase in age, we start to have a decline in muscle mass that impacts our muscle strength and muscle power. In later life, that loss of strength and power really starts to accelerate and compromises the individual's ability to remain independent and functionally able to look after themselves in their own home. What we often take for granted is some of the other things which change along the way, like our aerobic capacity, because when our muscles are not good, we have to drive oxygen to them to get them to work more, which means that our heart and lungs need to work harder. That our metabolic rate decreases because every one of our muscles is always turning over energy, and when we have less muscles, we turn over less energy. We also have less blood volume, which means that we also have less availability to carry nutrients around our body. Increased body fat related to decreasing in levels of activity and decreasing metabolic rate. And bone mineral density, because the bones are the levers through which our muscles work. So when we don't challenge our muscles, our bones respond accordingly and get smaller and weaker, and vice versa. When we do challenge our muscles, our bones remain bigger and continue to grow and hold up our skeletal frame. As all these things change and culminate, then all these other later life geriatric syndromes start to emerge, like the end stage frailties and sarcopenias, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. But that also impacts our level of activity. And with decreasing activity, we also have increasing sedentary behaviour, and hence we have this double-sided sword. There's a lot of other emerging data around as well that shows that if we are not healthy and well, muscularly healthy and well, we also have poor surgical outcomes. We also have a greater risk of developing dementia. Our balance confidence falls and our falls start to increase. But then, as I said before, the primary outcome of all this is a change in our ability to look after ourselves. In relation to sarcopenia, the decline to below normal in muscle mass and change to below normal in muscle strength and muscle function. As we age, we have an increased prevalence of sarcopenia, and that culminates in the residential aged care setting to having about 40% of the entire population. But it's really the big changes in our muscle strength measured by grip strength and our functional ability measured by walking speed that really impact our ability in comparison to our increasing disability in that later life stage. What we do know though is if we stay on this normal trajectory, like most adults in the population do, we get to about the first third of our lives healthy and well, and then slowly but surely crash towards disability. But if we actually engage in better health life behaviours, exercise, diet, getting enough sleep, not drinking too much and not smoking, then we can actually push back and remain independent till the day we die, or at least have a compressed period of morbidity before death. And this research shows as well, this is available to anybody, independent of their age, their disability, or their level of disease. The space I very much work in is that space there, helping older adults push back to well-being. I'm a great believer that in later life, with declining muscle mass, strength and power, the primary answer that older adults should be engaged in is resistance training or weight-bearing exercise. Studies have shown and continue to show, as we have more and more emerging data, that with resistance training, people, and with weight-bearing exercise, people get stronger and bigger muscles, they get bigger bones, they have an increased sleep profile, and they have improvements in their activities of daily living. They also have decreases in their symptoms of disease, both physical and mental, and they have a reduction in their falls risk. And resistance training has even been shown to have a protective effect when the stimulus is even taken away. So some of the research I did a long time ago showed that even after 6 months of resistance training, if you took away the stimulus, people could still remain functionally active and functionally well, even though they weren't doing the gym training anymore. And some other emerging data shows that when we then couple that with deliberate falls prevention exercise, so doing static, dynamic and balance-based exercise, we actually can push back on falls quite significantly. And I'll show you a paper I was part of for that in a moment. So just going through a bit of evidence quite quickly. So I started on this pathway in the mid-2000s through a research honours and then a PhD. The research I did for my PhD showed that it didn't matter whether you did strength training or power training, older adults could get up to 40% stronger over a 6-month period using gym-based training. Following in behind that, they also had increases in muscle mass and increases in their activities of daily living. When we actually applied that to an unhealthy group of older adults, and by that I mean older adults who already had aged care needs and were being funded through aged care programs like the Commonwealth Home Support Program or home care packages, we also found that with 6 months of twice weekly training, they became incredibly well. They had a reduction in their frailty and improvement in their function, also reductions in their sarcopenia risk, improvements in their quality of life, decreases in their depression, so on and so forth. And impressively, some very large and notable changes in their muscle strength for upper, core, and lower body, and all that translating to improved levels of functional well-being. And I've even been privileged to be among research that was done in the residential aged care setting. So this is a Sunbeam trial that was performed by Jenny Hewitt. It was a trial which was only finished and published a couple of years ago, but what it has done is actually blown a lot of the other previous exercise in the residential aged care setting studies out of the water. Previously, they'd shown an improvement in falls prevention, but nothing previous has been able to show as much as a 55% increase in falls reductions amongst participants following twice weekly resistance training for 6 months. And it didn't just impact the fallers, the single fallers, but it also impacted quite significantly the multiple fallers. And also impressively, there were very few serious events, like people got muscle soreness and stuff like that, but they definitely never had any other adverse events. And the adherence was incredibly high amongst this population, showing it is an acceptable form that could be applied to this residential aged care setting quite easily. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a resistance training gym-based environment, though I'm a great believer in that because, you know, in all bluntness, on a machine, the machine does almost everything for you except for produce the force. But you still get to work on your muscles and your joint mobility, all those sorts of things. But you can just load that machine up progressively and work on increasing your mass and your strength accordingly. But even if you're left without the access to that sort of environment, the home-based environment can be equally as profitable for functional gains for older adults. And this is represented by the Active at Home study that we did up in Queensland a few years ago. This is still a running program. It's actually quite a wise alternative for a lot of older adults. They can fund it through their aged care package. It's delivered by their home care worker. So we trained home care workers up to go out to the home, develop relationships with the client, guide them through the program, and then support them as they did the program off into the future. The program's quite simple, just some Very, very standard upper and lower body strength-based exercise using body weight or stuff you can find around the home, things like soup cans, water bottles and stuff. And then couple that with the balance exercises, looking both at static, dynamic and agility. And after a period of training, 18 weeks of training, you can see the big positive changes we had. These people were actually able to push away from frailty. They had increased competency in the home, doing daily activities of daily living. They had very large reductions in the times that they were presenting to their GPs or their specialists. And again, the adherence was incredibly high, where some people who thought they might never do it started doing it 5 days a week. Importantly, with the support of their personal care workers, they were able to upscale it, start to do a little more repetitions, speed of movement, things like that. And that also then added to the gains that they got through participating in the program. A final consideration is the whole concept of prehabilitation. So with older adults going in for planned surgeries, we know that if they just sit around and do nothing and wait for that surgery to happen, their risk of low recovery or poor recovery can be quite significant. And this is what's shown by the work done by Carly and Silva, who produced the figure off to the right of the slide. So what they showed was that if people got involved in even a shorter period of prehabilitation of 4 weeks of doing regular exercise aimed at improving their functional well-being, they could have a shortened recovery time and increased quality of life during recovery, significant decreases in post-operative complications, and then a greater ability to return home from hospital. And we see that quite regularly, like for those of you guys who are working in the space where you might see joint replacements and things like that, we know conclusively that when people are involved in regular exercise before that joint replacement, their success post that joint replacement, not only with the comfort of the joint, but of getting back to mobility, getting back to their daily activities, is significantly higher. So I incorporate all this into the work that I do with Southern Cross Care. So I have a large team of allied health professionals, a number of high functioning exercise clinics. We deliver services in clinic and off site. And we go through a very simple process which follows evidence-based best practice. We do a health assessment at the beginning of the program. We use the data we collect. We couple that with the goals that the client sets for themselves. We bring it to a multidisciplinary case conferencing event. We utilize that case conferencing to find, is there anything missing or needed for the health pathway for the client? And then we put the client through the therapy they need until they can get into continued supported wellbeing based strategies, whether that be social engagement, whether it be mental health support, but most prominently, we always use exercise on a regular basis to keep them functionally well. We continue to support them and we continue to push them down a number of pathways to give them ongoing health literacy, ongoing social engagement, and making sure that they can get to clinic and home. And then we marry that all up with some innovative ideas to keep them engaged. So we do targeted programs for people with cancer, stroke, Parkinson's. We support the carers of the loved ones who are coming to access our services. And then we also support quite significantly those people who have high levels of dementia, again, continuing to put exercise into their life so they can remain home and remain independent. COVID has been disruptive for our services, but we recognised very early in the piece that we needed to continue to support our clients. And we've done that because we know that once they remove themselves from exercise, they can have accelerated losses in functional decline, and all the good work that they've been doing with us can be quickly undone. We know that when they do have those declines, when they slip into deeper habits of physical inactivity or sedentary behaviour, their risk of reduced functional reserve and their risk of infection also becomes heightened. And then we've all heard the news about the impact of social isolation, not only on physical well-being, but also on mental health. So we've been working to support our clients to remind them that there is somebody out there thinking about them, there is people out there who care about them, and helping them to remain engaged as many ways as possible. How we did it, very early in the piece, we changed how we did everything. We went back to just doing one-on-ones, and we called them group-based classes. Some areas which were outdoors, we had the opportunity to do a small, slightly larger classes, but we stuck to only 4 people until we knew some of those restrictions had been changed. Now, I know different restrictions across different states, but very early in the piece, a lot of aged care providers actually had to shut their doors because they couldn't continue to support their clients because they had fears about their environments, their capacity to do infection control, and their capacity for reduced crossover between clients and then heightened risk to clients of diseases. So over the last 8 weeks, we have slowly but surely ramped back up to normal. And now we use a 4 square metre rule for most of our gym-based spaces. We've continued to offer on-site and off-site services, but we did reduce our off-site service costs so that people who wanted to remain socially isolated could get those services directly to their home. And we continued to do all our social engagement activities as long as we could maintain the social distancing rules. And we've also jumped into the telehealth space and done quite successfully to fill a couple of days of telehealth amongst our clientele who still want to remain socially isolated. It has given us a new opportunity, in a sense, to look outside the box. We had been operating like an allied health and wellness centre. We had been putting evidence-based practice into place, but now we've had to look outside the box. We've quite adapt to reinventing ourselves, embracing new ideas and embracing new pathways. Very proud of the work that my teams have done during this period. It's also taught us a few other things: to be resilient, but to remain focused in that very client-centered way that we are. And it's also given us an opportunity to embrace a lot of new ideas, and they now continue to be mainstream practice. So it's, COVID-19 doesn't change the fact that you still need to exercise for physical health and well-being. And I believe we've been able to offer that to our clients, and our clients have responded in kind by also not only staying well and staying independent, but returning to our services and putting their faith in our services now that COVID restrictions are starting to slow down. All right. So I hope you've had something to take away from this talk. I am very happy to answer any questions.
Now, Tim, thank you, Tim, so much for your talk. And I must admit, the Finns might still be asleep and the other ones are too intimidated. But thankfully, I can have some questions for you. So to the audience, please send in your questions. We had a few that I already answered, but that's why the QA box is just in the bottom of your screen. So type your questions in there and we'll answer them. But I will now ask some questions on your behalf. One thing I really liked, how Tim, you talked about your old research and said that even after 6 months without the stimulus, so without strength training, people were able to return to normal, which I thought was really great, considering we've only had 2 months of isolation at the moment. Within that, your group you had and that time frame, was there a difference between clients? Did people react differently, such as those who were more active before, did they recover quicker, or were there other factors that could relate to their recovery time and how quickly they regain more their health factors?
So I've seen a variety of people come through this pathway, and it's not going to be a simple answer for you. We've got different levels of motivation, different levels of willingness and engagement, and then we need to think about the multiple barriers that people are faced with, let alone basic things like financial implications to how regularly they can train. I've seen people bounce back quite rapidly, and I think it's mostly related to their current level of wellness. So obviously somebody who has more advanced levels of chronic disease, higher levels of disability, changes in musculoskeletal balances, they're a little bit longer in their recovery time to regain that range of motion, to stop feeling sore, the DOMS, after training. So it's not necessarily an age thing. I've seen 80-year-olds come through who can still do box jumps and throw dumbbells around, and I've equally seen people who are coming through the door in their early 60s and they're dragging a wheelie walker in front of them or have oxygen in tow. So I think it does really come back to how well they are at that point in time, how well they can train, but also how much motivation they have to make those gains.
Yep, that's good. Now we have some questions coming in. I might actually, so the first question that there's been with 4 votes, 4 likes, is can you share about how did you did your telehealth? We will actually have 2 presentations after this. So Sharon is purely focused on exercise at home, and Bob will also cover telehealth. So I wonder if maybe this is something we can come back to in the end about telehealth and have all of the panelists in the end, and maybe Tim, then you can put in your input. But we're going to have 2 more telehealth presentations because this is now the one, the likes are coming up all the time. So if that's okay with all with the person who asked the questions and all the voters, let's talk about telehealth in the end.
Yep.
And I'm sorry. And also, there's another question. Tim, how did you manage to keep exercise a high priority for your clients when they're isolated at home? Again, that's a bit of a home exercise one to discuss in the end. But if you can briefly talk about your telehealth and also the motivation, how you kept them going at home.
So as I said, like we realised that people, if they isolated, they wouldn't be doing anything at home. So we took a very pointed and rapid approach in relation to phone communications with clients. Once we knew quite rapidly what our structure would look like once we were reduced down in group sizes and capacity on site. So we rang and we offered people alternatives, and we rang and we offered people alternatives with the reasoning behind the reason they should stay engaged. We do a lot of work in the health literacy space. We don't just ask people to come to gym or come to class or come to therapy and just go through the motions with them. We also engage with them to make sure that they understand why they're doing certain exercises, the value it has not only there, but in their own home. And we also spend a lot of time in a place called appreciative inquiry. So the clinicians I work with have spent a lot of time trying to work away from those clinical goals, the strength, the function, the independence, and work towards what those people truly want. So do they want to remain active with their families? Have they got a holiday plan for the future? Have they got a caravan out the back and they want to be able to hitch it up and go for a drive? So we utilise all that to underpin the reason people need to exercise. And so when we were making these phone calls, we were revisiting goals with people to remind them why they needed to stay exercising.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I've just quickly answered the other ones. So in the research team, was the training used only on machine equipment, or was there also some bodyweight training?
So the bodyweight training, the Active at Home program, we did bodyweight training. The Sunbeam was a machine-based and then body weight for balance, as well as the Muscling Up Against Disability was machine-based with balance. And then my very early PhD stuff, again, was all very machine-based as well.
Excellent. Now, we've run out of time with the questions, but they're really, really brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for sending in the questions, because they're really good ones. And I think there's a lot of questions on telehealth, so I think it would be good to... when Bob and Sharon will also be talking about telehealth and home exercises. So hopefully we'll have a big conference in the end. I will be a tiny little ending, and then we can discuss this more so we can actually move on to nutrition. Thank you again, everybody, for the questions. Please keep them coming. That's really good. We have so many questions open. Now it's time for us to move on to our next speaker. So we'll move on to nutrition, because it's sort of, you can't really gain muscle if you don't eat protein. So our next speaker is Ngaire Hobbins. Just checking that I'm not muted. No. Is an accredited practicing dietitian specialising in gerontology, cognitive health, aged care and dementia. And Ngaire really hopes to help older people enjoy independent, productive and fulfilling lives in their later years. As a clinician, she enjoys the chance to translate complex science into language and sensible practical advice for everyday people. Ngaire has also published 3 books. You can find them in the bookshops, giving everyday people advice on sensible practical eating based on scientific research. Now, I've again heard Sharon talk many times, and she really puts it in a nice concept, and also also works together with different aged care facilities. So there's some fantastic information coming on nutrition. Ngaire, you have the next 15 minutes, and then we'll have more questions again. Thanks, Tim, and welcome, Ngaire.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. I'm going to move straight into it because 15 minutes is short to get through all this stuff. So let's go on to what we're going. Oh, sorry. There we go. Look, what I want to talk about and what Tim talks about is always fantastic. I love hearing that. But not only does muscle give you a whole lot of things to do with your lifestyle and dementia risk reduction and the like, but muscle is actually much more than what you actually use to do physical things. Muscle is also your protein reserve. So it's an interesting thing. We keep reserves of fat. We know we keep reserves of body fat. We keep reserves of body carbohydrates. And we keep reserve of protein, but the protein reserve is also doing something. It's also muscle. We need that. We don't eat 24 hours a day, but we need protein 24 hours a day. So when we're not actually eating, when you're not actually providing protein from your digestive system, your muscles are providing a protein source to keep your immune system going, which is needed all the time, especially in these COVID times. But even when you're not aware you're fighting off an illness, your immune system can be running in the background, and that's building protein. You're always repairing body organs. You're always making new cells, all sorts of cells, blood cells, liver, kidney, heart, whatever. Cells are always being made. So you're always doing maintenance and repair work. And any sort of repair after injury or surgery, tiny scratches, grazes, heavy muscle work, whatever, any repair work that has to be done has to come from protein that's provided that goes into the system. And if you're not actually eating it at that time, you're going to have to provide it from somewhere else, and it comes from your muscles. The interesting thing here is your brain glucose supply. Now, your brain is dependent on glucose for its energy reserve. And what many people might not realise is that even though it's only 2% of your body weight, it's uses about 25% of the energy that your body uses at any point in time. And because of that, it's a very fuel-hungry organ, and it requires this constant supply of glucose. Now, you get glucose from carbohydrates that you eat, sweet and starchy things, and from small reserves that you keep in your body. But if for any reason you're not eating well, or you're not eating at all, and that can happen when people are feeling unwell, and particularly as people get much older, often in isolation, depression and social isolation can depress appetite, and people don't eat much. And if you're not eating much, your glucose reserves are used up in a day or a couple of days. You still have to keep your brain going, even if you are not eating very well, and you use your protein, your muscle protein, to do that, because protein can be changed into glucose. It's very inconvenient. You can't change body fat into glucose, because that would be great, but that doesn't work. Muscle protein gets changed into glucose to keep your brain going. And that is a significant loss. And the other thing that's alluded to is that muscle also assists in insulin action. So it assists your insulin system to work well throughout your body. So if you have active muscle and you've got plenty of muscle in your body, then you are avoiding diabetes and you're minimising the likelihood of symptoms developing. I'm going to go in quickly into body weight loss, because this is a really important issue to understand that it's quite different if you're a younger adult from when you're an older adult. And this is a physiological inconvenient truth, for want of a better term. It's nothing that, it's not guidance for people. It is a physiological difference. So younger adults, below about your mid-60s, in those, of course, weight loss is important. You must stay as lean as you can to maintain health and to ward off chronic illness in the future. And if you do lose weight in those times, you proportionally lose more fat and not as much muscle. When you're beyond middle age, as Tim has gone through, you actually are losing muscle. But if you go on a diet as such, then you lose slightly more fat and not as much muscle, depending on how much activity you do. Physical activity is always important, but dieting alone in some of those cases can actually be helpful in weight loss. But when you get beyond that age, weight loss is not necessarily helpful and in fact could be harmful. And the reason that is because any weight loss at that age is going to cause muscle loss, and that can be quite substantial, and then you see all the impacts that happens. And it's because there isn't the anabolic, so the building up stimuli that are there naturally. And the only thing that's left to tell your muscles they're needed is to do things with them. And yes, that is absolutely the ideal situation. But I deal with a lot of people who are not in ideal situations, and they think that going on the latest diet is a good thing to do because their doctor keeps on saying you must lose weight, you must lose weight. General community discussion is you must lose weight, you must be thin, but actually unless you can do it with good resistance exercise, it's actually more likely to be harmful than helpful. Why is it harmful? It's disastrous from many situations, but from a nutrition sense of point of view and from a wellness point of view, it increases the incidence and severity of illness because you're not getting that protein reserve in the background. And when we're up against something like COVID, this is immensely important. It impairs any sort of wound repair that you have to do. It slows down your recovery if you do become ill for any reason, and if you've had an accident or surgery, which, you know, do continue to happen despite the fact that COVID's around. You know, all those that regular life happens. And when you lose muscle, you also increase rates of a condition called chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation is a part of the reason for chronic. It's a driver of chronic decline. A cognitive decline and a risk factor for dementia development, and also for other chronic ill health. And muscle loss drives chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation drives muscle loss. So once you get down that path, you're on this vicious circle. It also worsens or initiates a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. If some frail older person has lost enough muscle, they are much more likely to actually have insulin resistance or to in fact end up with a diagnosis of diabetes. Impacts on brain fuel supply, obviously, and something that's often not thought about is it alters the rate at which you're able to clear medications. So if someone loses weight, and that they may not realise, it might not be obvious or no one thinks about it, if you lose 5 or 10% of your body weight, that is going to affect, because most of that is going to be muscle in most older people, and we're talking about older people now. In those people, in older people, if that muscle loss is reduced, then your medication clearance rate can go down, and you can actually be overdosing on medications that the same level that you've had for 10 years. It obviously increases physical incapacity, and then people are less likely to go out and about. It increases social isolation. Both of those are really, really challenging for appetite, and therefore people eat less, and therefore we end up with issues of malnutrition. When it comes to malnutrition, a good ESPN is the European Society for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition, basically an international nutrition body, and their report that came out just in May indicated that malnutrition worsens outcomes, but people are more likely to die and more likely to have much worse consequences from, if they do suffer from COVID, if they're malnourished. And that can be even just being at risk of malnutrition. So weight loss is a risk factor for malnutrition in older people, not in younger people. This is in older people. So let's look at protein. So what you need to do, you must do muscle activity. The other guys are going to talk about that. I'll leave that to you guys. There's no way around that. This underpins everything I say. But when we look at protein, the average requirement of protein for an older person, for an adult in general, is between 0.8 and 1 gram of protein for every kilo you weigh each day. For adults 70 plus, because of those slightly higher needs and a whole lot of other things, it actually is 20% higher than that, 1.2 grams per kilo of body weight your day. Now, this is in a normal situation. And in older adults, unfortunately, that can be impacted by age-inappropriate eating advice, the sort of thing about everyone must be thinner and everyone must be, you know, leaner and all that sort of stuff. And also, often appetites are smaller, so that if you've got a smaller amount of food, it's harder to get the protein in, when in fact the amount of protein people need is higher. That acceptance that it's okay to get thin and whatever as well. And if people have wounds, or if you are fighting off something like COVID, or if you've got an illness of any sort, you can need 2 or even 3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. The very high levels would be something like an extreme pressure injury, but they can happen if you're isolated and not doing physical activity as well. So these things, it's a really interesting discussion when we get to that stage. There was a really interesting article that came out just recently, but a lot of researchers, but based in Italy, looking at what happens and what they've found, and giving some guidelines about nutrition, which are really useful. So they looked at muscle loss, which we know about. Now, during this time in home confinement, they're looking at really rapid muscle loss. I've given the reference at the end, so you can have a look more at that. And as a result, increased body fat and reduced insulin sensitivity. And what they've said is that during these times of isolation, or home confinement as they call it, reduce kilojoule intake so you're not ending up gaining body fat. Fair enough. And interestingly, they've given a recommendation of 1.3 grams of protein for every kilo body weight. So that's up again. So that's even for a younger adult, 1.3 kilograms. So we have to consider that's obviously, that means that for an older person, we're going to have to add on to the 1.2 to some extent. They didn't go into that, but there has to be a thinking around that. They also suggested that the largest meal should be early in the day, the smallest in the evening with an overnight fast. So we're looking at a sort of a modified intermittent fasting regime with protein spread across the day if possible. And specifically, and this will become more and more prevalent in discussing nutrition, avoiding over-processed foods wherever possible, and going for fresh, seasonal, local foods wherever that is possible at all to get those things. And so that's a really general recommendation, and they're great. We need to remember, if anyone's dealing with older adults, that maybe that protein needs to be pushed up, and certainly the not reducing kilojoules, because we don't want these people to lose weight. We staying the same is good. We don't losing weight. So it's a different thinking. And a 12-hour fast might be impossible for someone who can only eat tiny meals. You have to spread it out during the day. So these things we have to think about. Just quickly to what to consider during COVID times. It's very important to protect ourselves, but there's a lot of promotion of individual things, the anti and that are going to boost your immune system. You can't really boost your immune system, and in fact taking something that does boost, if it could, your immune system might actually take it over the top into the territory of autoimmune diseases, because you don't want to go too far. Your body is really good at taking what it needs from the food it gets and actually using that to keep your immune system going well, as long as you give your muscles are working and you provide the protein. But the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant containing foods, which will protect your cells, vegetables, fruits, seeds, nuts, wherever possible, fresh herbs, things like that, coloured foods basically, and good oils, olive, nut, anything from nuts and seeds, and of course oily fish, marine sourced fish, all those things. It doesn't all have to be fish oil. It can be oil from nuts and seeds. That's very good for your brain and good anti-inflammatory component of your diet. And vitamin D. Vitamin D is interesting because home isolation or not going out and about, whatever, can reduce your vitamin D levels because you need to be in the sun to get vitamin D. And there's mounting evidence that low vitamin D is associated with worse outcomes in COVID, but also in European countries where vitamin D status was lower, there's a higher incidence of COVID. There could be other things in that, but there seems to be gathering evidence that this is significant, and there's discussions on the fact that really needs to be something we look at, and that taking supplements of that particular vitamin if you're low is not particularly harmful. And obviously when people are isolated, not only does it affect what you do, your ability to do things, but it tends to make people's appetites go down. Some people are not able to access food very easily, and therefore people might head for malnutrition. Oh, I've got to the end. I must have done really well. I don't know what my timing was like, but maybe we can do some questions. Those are two of my books, just by the way, and the references I mentioned in there.
That was brilliant because there is questions for you. I might actually merge some of these ones because there's some, and then some of them you've already answered, but I'll ask anyway. So first, what kind of a diet would you recommend for those aged 60 years and above?
Well, I always say to people, you know, to actually put it in simple terms, I always say put a protein food at the centre of every meal and surround it with as many colours as you possibly can. Then at least 2 meals a day, drizzle over some good oil. So we're looking at any sort of protein food, and yes, it's good to know exactly how much, and I give those numbers in the studies to give people an idea of the difference between younger and older. You know, you can look at my books, you can look at protein ready reckoners and get an idea of what you're getting. But a protein food like either a meat or a dairy or cheese is a very high protein, eggs, fish, the like, or a vegetarian alternative is fine. Put that at the centre, like effectively at the centre of your plate, and every other colour around it. And that's really what you need to do. And that means you have to have a focus at breakfast. People often forget, you know, fruit and yogurt's great if you're young and you can eat a great big piled bowl, but if you're much older and you can only eat a little bowl, that's not going to have quite enough protein. A whole cup of yogurt has about 10 grams of protein. So you need to be having the yogurt and maybe putting some nuts or ground nuts or even maybe some milk powder you sprinkle on top or whatever, boosting up the protein. So there's ways to think about that, but that's what I would say. And there's no alternative to exercise.
That's brilliant. All right, let me see. Now the question, I'm actually going to expand this. There's also a few votes on this. How much protein should an average 70 to 80-year-old consume per day? And I'm going to extend this question a little bit and say, how would you even change that during COVID? Do you think we should increase the protein intake for 70 to 80-year-olds?
Yeah, it's look, if someone say 70 kilos, they're going to need about, well, we're looking at probably close to 90 grams of protein a day. And if you spread that out through 3 meals or through 6 smaller meals, 30 grams of protein is a reasonable amount. That's a big piece of steak, but what you could do is you make sure you've got, such, say if you're a meat eater, you make sure you've got the meat and you can add to it with things like also add pulses because they've also got protein and they've got fibre, so that's useful. Cheese is a really good protein source. So you can sprinkle cheese over meals to add a bit of extra protein. If you're having a salad, for example, you could have a can of tuna, whatever, with your salad at lunchtime, but then you put on some cheese, you know, maybe some feta cheese and maybe some nuts as well, some, you know, almonds or something or other that you like the look of. So you've actually put in 2 or 3 different proteins. And if someone is struggling to eat a lot of food, you can use high protein drink type things. You can make them up yourself, you know, the old-fashioned egg flip. Don't tell anyone that I've said eggs because, you know, you shouldn't have them raw. But anyway, that sort of drink, so you put in milk powder and milk, you can actually increase the protein level of the milk that is sitting in your fridge. You use about a cup of milk powder, say skim milk powder. It doesn't have to be low fat. I'm using skim milk powder as a term because skim milk has the fat removed, so it's very high in protein. You add it to your milk, so a cup of milk to about 1 litre, mix it up, tastes about the same, just a little bit richer, and then every time you put it in your tea or coffee, you've got an extra protein. All those sort of things, and making up, you can make up, you know, for if people have got a bit of a sweet tooth, and that certainly happens in dementia, and if you're 50 or 60, you know, or younger, you should be trying really hard to avoid sweetened things. But when people are much older, the most important thing is getting the food in. And if the food goes in because they like the taste of it, because it tastes sweet, use the sweetness to increase the sugar. So you make a custard or whatever, which is nice and creamy and lovely, and you add milk powder or evaporated milk or ground nuts or extra eggs, and you boost up the protein, and they like it. You know, if you try and be really good and cut down the sugar, they might not like it, and therefore it doesn't go in, and it's not nutrition unless it goes in your mouth.
Now, I'm going to merge 2 questions for you because you could put them in the same. So there's a question for clients with religious beliefs, what are alternatives for proteins if health supplements are not cheap locally? And also, to continue from there, is there a difference for protein intake based on ethnicities among older adults, for example, Asians and Westerns?
I am not aware of a lot of studies that actually have looked at that specifically in protein. There's certainly differences in muscle structure and muscle gain. So in smaller Asian frames, it's different, but the bulk of evidence still looks about the same on protein. So you still have to be looking at boosting up protein. So whether that, it doesn't matter whether it comes from animal or vegetable sources, it doesn't matter what your source of protein is in the diet. If you're having noodles, you have, you know, wherever possible, you have at least have egg noodles. So at least you've got, because eggs are going to add some protein. Nuts and seeds. Nowadays there are different things coming onto the market like hemp seed protein or hemp protein. Quinoa has got more protein than rice has. Rice is good, you know, it's got protein, but you have to eat a larger volume because it's also got carbs and things in it. But when you have rice, then adding something with a protein source will boost that. So you mix those two together. But certainly it does seem like that additional protein, of course, to build muscle and whatever, is still required. You still need that. And I often say to people that, you know, people go, this can't be, you know, this seems new and different, but what it is that not long ago, 70 was really old. I think most older people realise that. And if you only had to live till 70, that reserve you got till 40 would probably keep you going. But we need to go further than that. We want to push the reserve by doing more activity and by building that protein reserve so we've got it when we need it.
Now, we're running out of time. I'll merge a few questions because this has to be a very quick answer. There's been questions, can adults around 60 take whey protein? But there's a few other questions about the plant proteins. What about vegan older adults? Is it too difficult to provide 90 grams of plant-based protein? Is plant protein better than animal protein, and is plant-based protein effective? So can you answer all these in one? So, and it has to be.
I have to say, in older clients with little appetites, it is a big challenge to get enough plant-based protein. I have to end up having to use some sort of supplementary addition, like, well, hemp's a new thing in their protein, some sort of proteins, a soy protein powder, nuts and whatever to boost it up. If they will eat milk and eggs, then that's not as difficult. It is more challenging, but building muscle by doing activity is actually the most powerful of the two. If you had to compare eating the protein and building the muscle is the most powerful. Combining the two of them together is the most powerful. Building muscle on its own is the next one down, and then giving yourself protein is the next one down from that. So it is challenging and you have to work at it. But I always say, you just have to be really vigilant using protein.
Thank you so much. And again, we have a lot of questions to be answered afterwards, and there's more questions coming in, but I think we got a lot of information. Now, thank you, Ngaire. It's time to move ahead, and our next presenter will be talking about home exercises. So also, Sharon's talk will probably answer some of the earlier questions. So Dr. Sharon Hetherington is an accredited exercise physiologist with a doctorate in the field of exercise and healthy aging. She has a keen interest in using adaptive technologies to help people exercise safely at home. Her work with Exercise and Sport Science Australia and with Bernie Bray have helped her to progress an understanding of how exercise at home can improve the health and independence of older people. So thank you, Sharon, for joining us, and you're up.
Thank you, Tori. I think I'll just get straight into the presentation. I'm just checking that I'm not muted. No, that's fine. So welcome everybody who's online. I'm going to be talking about exercising at home. I'm an accredited exercise physiologist working in Brisbane, Queensland in Australia. So we'll get into our presentation. So I'm going to be talking about the why and the how of exercising at home. So looking at some of the reasons that people might be exercising at home, some of the benefits that can accrue. If you're a practitioner, some of the considerations that you need to take into account when you're prescribing exercise at home, and then some of the options you might look at to provide content for your for your clients who are going to be exercising at home. So traditionally, why have people been exercising at home? To reinforce your clinic-based sessions. So if you're seeing somebody for chronic disease management, for rehabilitation, or for that prehab that Tim was talking about earlier, you may see them in clinic for a limited number of sessions, and then you may provide them with a home program for them to keep up the work that you're doing with them in clinic. So that's probably the traditional reason that people would be exercising at home under the care of an allied health professional. It may also be that, as with the people in the Active at Home program that Tim referred to as well, there may be limitations which mean that they can't get into a clinic on a regular basis, and these could be around the costs of attending the clinic, access to appropriate facilities in their area, and transportation can be a major limitation as well. So if people are no longer able to drive themselves and they have limited access to any sort of public transport, that can mean they can't get into to do a clinic-based program. There's also convenience. So, you know, the convenience of being able to exercise in your own home in familiar surroundings, and a way to work exercise into your daily routine so that you can be exercising throughout the day. If you have a small program that you may be able to do, say, morning and evening, it means that, you know, you can exercise at the time that's convenient to you. And for some, it could be cultural considerations as well, because they may not want to go out and exercise, or may not feel comfortable, or maybe limited in their ability to go out and exercise in public. So being able to exercise in their home environment is more appropriate. And the reason that we've got this webinar going today, they may be exercising at home for their own safety. So at the moment, we're experiencing social distancing in many countries, and it helps to allay the health concerns of your older population if they know that they can exercise in the safety of their own home. And it means they can also, if they've been coming into a gym-based session, it means that they can continue their daily exercise or their exercise routine without having to go out in public and exercise. So exercising while social distancing, what are the benefits really? Why would you continue your exercise? And this is, if you have been seeing somebody in clinic or in the gymnasium, then maintaining the clinic-based gains is one of the main reasons, or a considerable reason, to be exercising at home. So we've got some evidence to suggest that home-based progressive resistance training can maintain gym-based improvements in muscle strength and lean body mass. Now, what's important there from that study by Dunstan is that it's important that to check that adherence is being maintained, and that the training volume is being maintained. So as you'll see later, one of the things to support people exercising at home is a regular check-in to see how they're going, what the training volume is like, are they filling out their exercise calendar, and do they need any support with form, particularly so that they're exercising effectively. Other benefits of exercising at home is an improvement in mood, and in these sort of uncertain times, a reduction in anxiety as well. Also to relieve boredom and to support that immune system so that people are staying healthy. Now, this is the different strokes for different folks. You will know, or you will be able to identify these personality types from your clinic populations, and they need different approaches. So we all know 2 or 3 of our clients who are just the self-starters. They have a strong belief in exercise. They've been exercising most of their lives. They may have played sport. They may already go to the gym on quite a regular basis. And so for these guys, you can set them a program, and you can be reasonably confident that they're going to go at it and be working away on their program. But then we go down a level, and these are loosely associated with the stages of change. We have the next level down, people who need more support than the self-starter. So for, important with, and these are cumulative. So the self-starter, set the program and go, maybe check back in with them in a few weeks' time. The needs support person will need regular check-ins. So you set the program and then regular check-ins to check their motivation and help them with adherence to their program. The reluctant exerciser, for them, fun and engaging. You need to get to know that person, know what inspires them, know what their motivation for exercising might be, and set your program accordingly. And then we have the unwilling exerciser. And it's for the unwilling, it's a matter of supplying good quality information about the benefits of exercise and setting a program that is simple and easy to do. So it's not a whole complicated list of instructions, but just something that's very simple to get them into some sort of regular exercise at home. So what are your considerations when you're setting a home exercise routine? You need to have a look at the client from the previous slide. What is their personality type? What are their exercise preferences if they've been exercising already? Have a look at that and try and stay in line with what they've been doing at the clinic if possible. And maybe any hobbies or interests that they have that you could leverage off and set some sort of exercise around those hobbies and interests. What sort of resources does your client have? Do they have any home exercise equipment? Can a small pack of home exercise equipment be delivered to them by courier? And do they have technology available in their home so that they can interact with you over Skype or over Zoom or using a telehealth app? And what's their capacity? So what's their capacity as far as knowing how to use the technology? They may have it at home, but they might need some support to actually use the technology that they do have. And that's perhaps something that you could address in a home visit when you're setting them up, show them how to use and log on to the Zoom so that they can communicate with you. What's their starting fitness level? Where are they now? And what's their experience to date with exercise? So what should we focus on? Strength, both Ngaire and Tim touched on maintaining our muscle mass and function because as Ngaire said, it's a protein reserve. And as Tim said, that is your independence. So myself, I particularly focus on leg strength because of its contribution to good balance and to functional independence. I try to incorporate balance exercises every day. And then some aerobic to try and maintain aerobic capacity as well. And that's where we need those fun and engaging workouts that people can respond to and follow along with. Now I've got some research there. So frequency periodization and duration periodization. Tim was talking about the progressive resistance training and how important that is to increase somebody's muscle mass and function and to build them up. With the machines that were used in the study that Tim referred to, they were programmable, so you could actually set the resistance increases, and that's much harder to do with a home exercise program where people won't have a whole set of dumbbells or different colored resistance bands. So what you can do is you can go with frequency periodization with some of the strength training, and that is they're starting say with for your first mesocycle, they're starting doing say 2 days a week, and they might be doing 10 repetitions, two lots of 10 repetitions of your exercises and doing them on 2 days a week. And then the next, do that for a couple of weeks and then increase it to 3 days a week and then to 4. So that's your frequency periodization. You're actually, and then go back to say 2 days a week at the end of the month so that they have sort of a rest week or a lighter week. So that periodization just changes it up, makes it increasingly challenging, but also gives them an opportunity for say a rest week where they do a little bit less. But it makes it interesting so they're not just doing the same thing at the same time with the same frequency. And with duration periodization, say with the aerobic training, is that, you know, perhaps in the first week they're doing 3 days a week and they're doing, say, 10 minutes at each session, and then building that up over the weeks where you're aiming to get up to, say, 30 minutes at each session. So there's a couple of papers there that I've got a reference list at the end. So Strohacker and Ngaire have some nice papers out about periodization as an alternative to progressive resistance training in the strict sense of the progressive resistance training. So what are your options? You could look at an in-home visit, particularly at the start of setting a program for somebody. So observing the health guidelines required during the social distancing time. And you could use that to assess if you don't know the client well, say perhaps they haven't been coming into your clinic for very long, or they are a new client coming to you. You can use that home visit to assess their suitability for exercising at home, and you can conduct a safety assessment of the environment that they're going to be exercising within. Telehealth consults are also available. So in Australia, there's a couple of telehealth options that I've been involved with. So there's PhysiTrack and CoView. So they're two telehealth platforms where you can do a secure individual consult with a person and basically gather the same information that you would from a home visit. Then other things that we've been using in our clinic, so we're using PhysiTrack, but we're using also Zoom for doing online exercise classes that we're broadcasting out. And by enabling the Zoom meeting, it also means that the participants in the class, and these are participants who were exercising at our facility in a group previously, but because the facility is closed at the moment, they can come together on Zoom, and it allows them to have a bit of social chat at the end. So there's extra time at the end of the session when they can actually talk to each other. Other helpful things to support your people exercising at home would be exercise videos. Now you can create your own, but also there's a plethora of these appearing online on Facebook and on websites all over the place. And if you review the content of them, so you do your own assessment of them, make sure that they're appropriate for your client. You know, for example, your client's interest might be in belly dancing for exercise, and you have no experience of belly dancing and you don't really have the capacity to make your own video. You can look up online, I think it's the Government of Victoria has a women's health, exercise health site, and that has belly dancing classes that people can do. So if that's something that will get your client actually exercising, then match them up to that content and just review and see how they're going along the way. There's also exercise instruction sheets and motivational worksheets, and making it a social challenge can be really good for motivation as well. So putting up a Facebook challenge, putting up a Facebook group where people can report back, yes, I've done my exercise today, and speak to other people in the group about it. And an exercise calendar on the fridge. Never discount the effectiveness of having something tangible that people can tick off and say, okay, look, I can look back over my calendar and see, yes, look, I did 2 sessions that week, 3 the next, 2 and then 5 sessions, so that they're getting some sort of visual feedback on their exercise regime. So Mike Vatitude have been doing some collaborations during these COVID times. We were working with HUR Australia to create a worksheet that is alternatives, home-based alternatives to the exercises that you can do on the HUR equipment. And that's been, I think, Tura would say that's been quite successful, going out to HUR facilities where people can no longer come in and use the machines. We've gone through with Tura and identified exercises that people can do that are alternatives, work the same muscle groups, but without having the HUR equipment available, which people are probably not going to have at home. And we've also had a small collaboration with the Selwyn Foundation in New Zealand, and under their Healthy Living section, they've linked to our YouTube videos, which are available for people who want to go through some very simple exercise regimes at home. So we've got the Take 5 series, which is 5 exercises for leg strength or 5 exercises for balance. And then we've got some 10-minute workout videos as well, all aimed at the older adults. So they're available for anybody who'd like to do any collaboration as well.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. I was just going to go crazy with my giraffe.
Was that a single squeak or a double squeak?
This was like a million squeak. I've given you maybe you didn't hear my previous squeaks, but it
Oh,
is like the ultimate squeak.
That's it.
I need to cut you off, but I have some questions for you.
Yep, so good. I'll go right to the end and ask me questions.
Brilliant. Sharon, are you aware of any good in-home risk assessment templates or resources for assessing safety of clients exercising at home?
Yes, there are templates available online, and we've also got a risk assessment video up on our website if people would like to have a look at that. And it's called Exercise Safely at Home, and it looks at like a typical lounge room or a typical area and talks through what to look for and what makes for a safe exercise area.
Oh, fantastic. Now, I had a question for you, actually. You mentioned in the article by Dunstan that they use the word maintain. Have you found any research where people are talking beyond that? So can you create at home an exercise routine that is there not just to maintain, but improve your strength and thus improve your health? Have you found any of those?
No, the main difficulty is that with home exercise, it's very hard to control for the training volume and for the adherence. So whereas in the clinic, you can be checking, that people are setting the weights and doing the exercises on a regular basis and doing the sets and reps. It's a lot harder with a home program to sort of monitor that. And so the research that I've looked at has said that maintaining, yes, but actually getting those gains is much harder.
Oh, brilliant.
Like muscle strength. Yeah.
I'm just typing some answers here, but I'll have you one last question. For home exercises, do you conduct outcome measures for them? If yes, how?
So within the programs that I've been part of, there are some like home-based tests or field tests that people can do. So you can do sort of the 30-second sit to stand. That's something that could be self-administered, and people could look at their improvements in that. Things like grip strength are much harder because you need equipment. But so the 6-minute walk test, 30-second sit to stand, 3-meter timed up and go. If people have got some simple equipment, they can do those easy field tests and they can look at their progress.
Fantastic. Now, thank you so much. I think it's very important to hear about the home exercises, considering that's what we all are doing. Every single one of us, except the lucky ones in Southern Cross Care who get to go to the gym. So thank you so much, Sharon. And with this in mind, I better move on and introduce us to our last speaker. So hopefully Bob is ready there in Adelaide. So our last speaker for the day is Bob Barnard. Bob is an exercise physiologist who manages the Centre for Physical Activity in Ageing with the Central Adelaide Local Health Network. He has held that position for 17 years in an over 40-year career in various health and rehabilitation settings within the South Australian Department of Health and Ageing. He has a major interest, including research in the benefits of prescribed exercise intervention for adult and especially older populations with chronic disease, including chronic heart failure and renal failure into dialysis. Also, Bob's clinic has been the same situation as everyone, and he has data from quite a number of clients. So I'm quite happy to welcome our last speaker, Bob Barnard. You can have the stage now.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
If you click on the share slides, then you can take over.
Yep. There we go.
There we go. Now we have your slides. Just click on the presentation.
Yeah. Got there. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I think the really good thing about this is that Tim's had to wait all this time to hear me speak. So I'm really happy about that, Tim. The COVID experience from our perspective was something that that came on with little notice, and it changed our whole mode of operation in a very short space of time. In order to give you a better idea of how that the changes impacted us, I really need to give you a bit of a context. So our centre's got a very long history of provision of services in the South Australian health community. As you can see, over 30 years of operation, working mainly in the area of community-based rehabilitation, but more recently in subacute care. So we've got staff in wards, but also over a period of time, a greater development in the area of telehealth. Our history goes back to include, I suppose, the experience of dealing with well over 11,000 referrals. So our numbers of clients have been very large on a year-by-year basis. And over time, we gradually refine the program that we now operate to have a number of special pathways for people who are in, I suppose, high risk, but also poor health circumstances. And our major, I suppose we'd call them flagship programs, are in the area of cardiac care. Some of that is cardiac rehabilitation. Some of it is dealing with people who've got end-stage cardiac disease, such as congestive heart failure. We work with people that come through with neurological issues. The majority of people that have had a stroke and have progressed through subacute rehab and are now back in the community again. So we've actually had large numbers of people in that particular grouping. Over the last decade, we've had more and more people in the metabolic area, and some of these people are on a pathway towards bariatric surgery. So it has been I suppose, a rapid increase within the health services to provide bariatric surgery to people who are willing to cooperate with, I suppose, the demands of what the service needs them to comply with. Our falls and balance work has continued since the beginning of our activities, and we work very closely with a group of referrals that come in for people who have been identified as being frail. And another group that we have is the perioperative group, and mainly in the area of pre-cancer surgery or surgery for people who have would be considered too frail or too obese to survive the particular surgery that they need. So we work those people up so that they can get to the point where surgery is possible. As Tim pointed out, we work in this domain of around the disability threshold, and you can see on the bottom right-hand side of your screen that same WHO graph of the course of functional capacity over the lifespan, and that point where people start to decline due to a whole range of issues, and they eventually get to the point where disability overtakes them. So that's what we do. That's our brief history. But we've actually spent a lot of time working with remote communication and supervising and prescribing exercise for people in a number of different areas. The original work that we did was for a group of DVA veterans, and what we had to do there was develop a particular home support program for people which involved the development of a a resource booklet, which we sent out to those people and supported them with phone coaching. There were some really good outcomes. The 3 stages were different levels of physical capacity, which we judged by a combination of medical referral and client self-report in terms of their physical activity. In 2004, the world had experienced the SARS epidemic, and it came to our attention here in South Australia that there was a Canadian home support exercise program, and we had some ideas which eventually became the Active Ageing Australia research project, which was called HAMP, which was Home Activity Monitoring Program. And that particular program took the idea of a home support exercise program and developed a way of delivering for people at a distance. From about 2010 onwards, in SA Health, we've had an increasing focus on telehealth and the development of a whole lot of resources and guidelines around how we go about assessing particular clients, including their risk and suitability, but also the numbers of support and resources that we can provide for people who would best be serviced by a telehealth model of care. So that is sort of our background in terms of dealing with telehealth. And to be honest, in more recent times, in the last 2 years, other than some specific programs within our health services, health in the home, HIF, and rehab in the home, RIF, those particular programs, and some regional bariatric patients, we've done very little telehealth up until about the middle of March this year. I'll just go back and talk very briefly about the HAMP program, Home Activity Monitoring Program. That program commenced in 2006. It was modelled on the idea of having remote contact with client self-assessment, client report and GP review, the development of an exercise resource booklet, and the use of telephone coaching, and the goal was to increase physical activity and reduce falls. We had fairly big numbers, and we followed those people for a year, and what we found was the most significant outcome was a reduction in falls compared with the previous year for the overall group. So rather, we looked at it on a group basis, so total number of falls in the 12 months prior to the program, and then followed up the total falls in the month in the year that the program was delivered to those particular people. The telephone coaching element of the program was, in those days, was novel, and it certainly assisted the way that we could deliver the program and implement follow-up, because the whole idea of this program was that we were actually never going to see these people. We were never going to meet them face to face. So the ideas were really developed along the lines of what would you need to do in order to provide a person that you didn't know, that you didn't and hadn't seen in a live setting, with an exercise prescription which was appropriate for them, and how do you then support that? The project itself was evaluated by the Ehrenberg Bass group in the UniSA, which looked at various elements of the program, and it was an interesting experience and has continued in one way or another since that time, and more recently has been developed into a program called Moving for Life Your Way. When you look at telehealth supported physical activity, and I've got a big focus on this for this particular presentation, a lot of things need to be considered in terms of, from our perspective, what is the goal of the service? So what are we trying to do for this particular individual? What are the patient risk factors? So what elements of the patient's physical health and capacity to understand and be able to deal with a particular telehealth modality? What are those issues that we need to be aware of, and how can we deal with them? What is the available technology? So, what do we have and what do they have, they being our patients? If we're using more, I suppose, upmarket monitoring, things which could be things like the wearables for blood pressure, heart rate, diabetes, and things like that, we can see that the technology and data, prescription, all of those elements need to be considered. Telehealth is supported by some good evidence. More recently, this particular study by Rawston, which looked at telehealth exercise-based cardiac rehab, it said that in terms of a very large number of studies included and cases, that telehealth could be as effective as centre-based exercise. Current research, we can see that there is some research which has been scoped in Australia by Ramage and her co-researchers, which looked at telehealth in real time to manage chronic conditions. That project's progressing. In our own perspective, because I'm running out of time, I gather, because I think I heard the little squeak, is that right?
You heard a little squeak, but not the crazy squeak, so you still have a few minutes.
Good. Okay, so in our own case, things started in South Australia in early January when we had the advice coming through the health system. We know that by late January that China had changed things. Australia also in January had started to lock down in terms of incoming flights, and we'd had our first infection reported in Melbourne in late January. In South Australia, things happened very quickly, and by March, travel had education, hotel stays, sport, and a directive to stay at home had been brought in for Australia, and the restrictions continued and still continue to some degree. We had 1 day notice. We had to deal with 350 clients who had to be transitioned into 3 subgroups, which we identified as a high risk, stable health and apparently healthy group. So we rolled out our telehealth options very quickly. We use various platforms, Microsoft Teams, Health Direct, PhysiTrack. PhysiTrack and Health Direct were our key ones which we've used and continue to use. There is a large amount of information available and support in order to do this, and we used all of these particular links in order to progress our staff along the pathway to being able to deliver telehealth support for our people at home. Our big focus group, and I'll just talk about this group mainly, we have our chronic heart failure group. We've been working with these people for 15 years. Our patient groups obviously vary from time to time, but we've been able to demonstrate through the use of support, remote support, that people who continue to exercise don't go to hospital as often, and they can maintain a better health over a year and beyond. Our particular participation by those particular groups, these were a small number that we used telehealth. We had our heart failure clients and our cardiac clients, and you can see there some examples of the reports that we were getting from people over the last couple of weeks. So these people have had 9 weeks of participation in a telehealth supported program at home. Our apparently healthy group, basically people have been supported by just a telephone call over the last 9 weeks, and what we're finding is that they're participating in a range of activities, some people multiple activities, but walking is very common. Things have changed, and we know that Australia's done pretty well, and we're easing the restrictions as we speak, so things are going more positive. But we do know that the outcome of being inactive are quite devastating, and I'll refer to the Narisi article, which was in the European Journal of Sports Science. You can see that if you have a closer look at that particular article, it's a very good coverage of what can happen when people are inactive, and in particular this applies to being at home. In summary, our clients have remained physically active, supported by the evidence that we found. The outcomes are positive. The regular contact indicated they were actually coping quite well with moderate self-isolation. The outcomes of the program's home-based exercise prescription itself and remote monitoring all require further study. There is a big focus on psychological health within the community, but I'm not sure about how this impacts older adults. I think we need to look more at that, because what we're hearing from the people we're in contact with is that it didn't seem to be quite as bad as we might expect. There is a lot of data around, a lot of publications in all sorts of areas, which you can have a look at my slides later and trace what's going on. So what have we learned? What's the new normal and what's our plan for the future? I think from an exercise physiology perspective that being inactive or being immobilised, does present a lot of challenges for people. I'm not sure though, and I'm pretty sure that, as Narisi said, the relationship between the dose, the exercise dose, and the outcomes is not really clear. So we really need to think about that in the future from an exercise perspective. But also, what do we want to achieve in terms of functional outcomes? What's significant from a clinical perspective? What's significant from a statistical perspective? Are we looking at a decline, or do we want no change, or are we looking for an improvement from an exercise program at home? And there's some references and links. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. I think it was actually interesting with yours that the papers of telehealth were from 2007. So there was a research published on telehealth 13 years ago. So I think the COVID time has been quite an eye-opening for all of us on the possibilities and chances we have that we really haven't tipped into because we didn't have to. And there's quite a few questions still left. And I was wondering if you can all answer them. We only can do a few. And again, Tim and Ngaire have been answering some of the questions while Bob was talking, and I'm sure Sharon can do the same. But this is really for all of you if you want to answer. So if home exercises are just to maintain, is it because of lack of knowledge, motivation from practitioner, patient of bodyweight methods, or there isn't evidence, or is it just too difficult for beginner movements to progress?
That was a question to me, wasn't it?
I think for you, but I think it's for everyone. And I think because you all have the knowledge on what is expected of progressive exercises and the health benefits. But I think all of you, Sharon, Tim, and Bob, you start, and then Sharon and Tim, if you want to add something, go for it.
Okay, we've invested most in our people with the greatest risk. So our heart failure group are people who are actually quite debilitated, and a number of them sort of progress fairly rapidly into palliative. So, it is an area that we need to work on and support them quite well. So we've invested a lot of time in individual contacts. So they're getting contacts once, even twice a week. We're using the telehealth options. They tend to be a younger population. So with those people, we can actually use the video, let's call it the video conferencing, we can visualize and see exactly what they're doing. So progressions have been possible in virtually all cases. So we're not just maintaining what they were like at the end, but we won't know until we get them back. And our next stage is we've actually had, out of all those people we said goodbye to on the 17th of March, we've actually got one person who's come in who was linked to us prior to having the ventricular assistive device put in, a VAD. So, basically a secondary pump to assist his heart. That person came back to us 2 weeks ago, and that's the only client we see. All the rest, we won't know what they're really like until we can assess them live. But the programs have been progressive. They need, progression is critical. Otherwise, boredom sets in as well as that. You just don't get a good result.
Oh, we all know that after being home for 2 months. So I think we all have got to learn, rude awakening about how is it for people who really are ill when we all are stuck at home for 2 months. It's
Yes.
quite a rude awakening. Now we're going to be running all the time. So I need to wrap up. Again, look at the answers. There's been a lot of questions answered, also typed in, and we will keep them and we will post them. Then we ended up recording this because we really had 450 participants. So we've been recording this webinar, and it will be posted on the HUR Australia website. Also, all the slides will be published there as well, so you can take a look at those later. All I can say at the moment is thank everyone. This is, again, the first webinar we've run, and we so appreciate absolutely all of you being here. We appreciate every speaker. Thank you for taking your time and preparing. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, which is extremely valuable, especially during the COVID times. Now, we hope that this is not the last one. Well, we hope, we know this is not the last webinar. We will be running another webinar around September. Just really looking into the COVID times, isolation should be over and we should be returning to normality. So we'll be discussing a bit more on how to train. What do we do to make that a success? And then to meet again in December to really discuss on how did we go. And we have a years of experience of what happened, and hopefully we have clear pathways to the future. So thank you to absolutely everyone for joining us. Please take a look at the HUR website. Again, all the slides will be there. The recording will be there. There's going to be information about all our speakers and their organisations. Someone was asking about Sharon's exercise videos at Take 5. There's a link to My Active Attitude, and you can find all the videos and the programs from there. Last but not least, if you have any feedback, please send it to us. There's an email address, info@huraustralia.com.au. We'll be happy to hear from you and hear, what did you think and what we should do differently. I'm just grateful of everyone being present. I'm grateful for all the presenters to be here. And with these words, I think I'm just checking my list, and I think I've said everything. Thank you again for joining, and we hope that we'll see you again in September. And one last thing, if you take a look at the HUR Australia website, Facebook site, you will find the article. A lot of people referred to the European Journal of Sports Exercise Science, the article from Italy that was published 2 weeks ago. On our Facebook page, there is a link to that article, so you can find that easily on our Facebook page. Thank you again. Thank you to presenters.
Thank you.
We'll see you in September. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.